I am Joshua, 36 years old, and my own brother texted the family group chat to ban me from my father's birthday party, completely forgetting that I was the one paying for the entire event. Before I tell you about how I left my golden child brother publicly humiliated and my parents begging for forgiveness, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. It was a Friday evening, the night before my father's 65th birthday. The house was filled with the kind of chaotic warmth I had always wanted growing up. My wife, Emma, was standing by the stove, stirring a pot of marinara sauce that made the whole kitchen smell like garlic and tomatoes. Our two kids, Caleb and Chloe, were sprawling on the living room rug, violently arguing over the rules of a board game. I was leaning against the marble kitchen island. I had a half-finished grocery list in my left hand and my phone in my right hand. I was exhausted, but it was the good kind of exhaustion. I had spent my entire lunch break that afternoon at my corporate office finalizing the details for my dad's birthday luncheon. I had booked the garden room at the Oak Creek Country Club. My mother had explicitly demanded that specific room 3 weeks ago. She told me it was the only space elegant enough to invite her wealthy neighbors without looking like she was trying too hard. I had paid the non-refundable deposit. I had spent an extra $500 on premium floral centerpieces because my brother, Matthew, complained that the standard club flowers looked cheap. I had ordered a massive, custom-designed cake from the most expensive bakery in the city. That was my assigned role in the family. I was the wallet. I was the fixer. If something needed to be paid for, arranged, negotiated, or rescued, it somehow found its way to my desk. For years, I let that fool me into thinking I belonged. I genuinely believed that making myself useful was the only way to earn a seat at their table. My phone buzzed against my palm. The screen lit up with a notification from the family group chat. I unlocked the screen, expecting a last-minute request. Maybe my dad wanted a specific brand of scotch for the toast. Maybe my mother wanted me to pick up the dry cleaning on my way to the club tomorrow morning. Instead, I saw a text from Matthew. "Stay home. Don't come tomorrow. We're sick of your family." I stopped breathing. The kitchen noise around me seemed to fade into a dull hum. I read the words again and again. I stared at the screen, honestly thinking there had to be more coming. A follow-up text. An explanation. A joke. Something. Matthew was arrogant and entirely self-centered, but blatantly uninviting me from an event I was actively funding seemed incredibly stupid, even for him. I waited. The typing bubble did not appear. 5 seconds later, a notification popped up under Matthew's message. It was my mother. She had reacted to his text with a thumbs-up emoji. Before I could even process the sting of that betrayal, my father did the exact same thing. Thumbs up. My stomach dropped into my shoes. A cold, heavy weight settled directly over my chest. Just like that, 3 people who shared my blood managed to make me feel like an unwanted guest in less than a minute. They didn't even have the decency to call me. They didn't pull me aside to have a conversation. They discarded me and my wife and my children in a group chat, with the casual indifference of taking out the trash. My fingers felt stiff as I typed back. "So that's what I am to this family." I hit send. The read receipts popped up almost instantly. They saw it. They saw my pain. They saw the confrontation. No one answered me. Instead, Matthew sent a completely new message, completely ignoring my existence. Anyway, about the cabin for the summer trip, I was thinking we should upgrade to the one with the hot tub. My mother replied seconds later. "Oh, that sounds lovely. Let's book it before it sells out." My father chimed in. "Make sure it has good cell service. I need to check my emails." They kept chatting right over my message. They were laughing about table seating, the weather forecast, and a summer vacation they were already planning, acting as if I had not just been violently shoved out of the room. I looked up from my phone. Emma was pouring the pasta into a strainer in the sink. The steam billowed up around her face. Caleb laughed loudly at something Chloe said. This was my real family. The people who loved me for who I was, not what I could buy them. That was the moment something inside me went completely still. I was not broken. I was not shattered. I was just still. The desperate, Anxious boy inside me who had spent 36 years begging for his parents' approval finally died on the kitchen floor. I set my grocery list down on the counter. I looked at the bank app icon on my phone screen. I tapped it. The screen loaded, displaying my checking and savings balances. I stared at the numbers. I stared at the automatic transfers scheduled for the next week. They wanted me gone. They were sick of my family. But they were deeply in love with my salary. It was time to show them exactly what life looked like without me. To fully grasp the absolute insanity of what I was about to do, you need to understand the foundation of my family. I grew up in a house where love was never announced out loud, but favoritism showed up in 100 quiet ways. Matthew was the golden child. He was 4 years younger than me, but he lived his entire life like he owned the building. He was outgoing in that effortless way my parents deeply admired. He was the center of every family story. If he won a local talent show, the whole house buzzed for days, and my parents bragged to everyone in the neighborhood. If he made a mistake, broke a window, or failed a class, it became something delicate that everyone rushed to excuse. My mother would blame the teachers. My father would say boys will be boys. I was the other kind of child. The one who did not cause scenes, did not ask for much, and learned very early that being easy to overlook was not the same thing as being easy to love. By the time we were teenagers, the difference between us no longer needed explaining. He got the new clothes, the better attention, and the kind of excitement that made my parents feel proud in public. I got practical things, leftover things, and a steady stream of reminders that I was mature enough to understand why I should not expect more. I will never forget Matthew's 16th birthday. My parents surprised him with a brand new car in the driveway. A shiny red sedan with a giant bow on the hood. My father clapped him on the shoulder and proudly announced that a young man needed freedom and opportunities. At that exact same age, I had been riding a rusty, second-hand bike to a part-time job at a grocery store. When I asked my parents for help buying a used car so I could work later shifts, my father looked me dead in the eye and told me that working young and struggling would build character. Character, responsibility, maturity. They weaponized those words. They used words like that whenever I was expected to accept less and smile about it. When I finally graduated college and landed a high-paying corporate job, the dynamic shifted from emotional neglect to financial expectation. The minute my salary increased, so did their emergencies. When my father went through a difficult stretch at work and stress hung over the whole family like bad weather, I did not become a son to comfort. I became an asset to depend on. I took extra shifts early in my career. I skipped vacations I wanted. I stepped into whatever gap needed filling. When my grandfather passed away and there were disputes over a small inheritance, the family tore each other apart. My parents used that chaos to manipulate me further, claiming I was the only reliable person left in the family. Nobody ever sat me down and demanded sacrifice. That would have been too obvious, too easy to resist. Instead, they let silence do the work. They let me notice the problem, step in, and then treated my help like the natural order of things. If a bill needed covering, they were relieved when I handled it. If my mother felt overwhelmed, she called me. And then there was Matthew. Matthew bounced from one failed business venture to another. He lived way beyond his means. When his choices started blowing up in expensive, exhausting ways, everyone turned to me like I was the emergency exit they had always known was there. I paid for things I should never have been responsible for. I covered his rent when he was facing eviction. I paid his legal fees when he got into a minor accident without insurance. I did it because every time I considered saying no, I could already hear the disappointment waiting for me. Not anger, not gratitude, just a heavy, suffocating expectation. Nobody talked about my help like it was generous. They talked about it like it was normal, like I had been born with a job description no one bothered to show me. Back then, I mistook that role for closeness. I thought maybe being the dependable one meant I mattered in some deeper way. Emma saw the truth long before I did. We met when I was 27, and she noticed the pattern almost immediately. She noticed that my mother rarely called just to ask how I was doing. There was always a hook attached to the conversation. A concern, a favor, a payment, a problem that somehow drifted toward me before the call ended. She noticed that my father spoke to me warmly when my wallet was open, but the minute something became inconvenient, I was suddenly the person expected to be practical and step up. I defended them all for years. I told Emma that families lean on one another. I said my brother had been through a lot. I kept confusing access with love. The breaking point for Emma, and the memory that haunted me the most, happened. My mother arrived a few hours later. She walked in with a smile that felt incredibly rushed. She kissed my cheek, held Chloe for exactly 3 minutes, and then her phone rang. It was Matthew. He was calling about some problem he insisted could not wait. I watched my mother's face change. She handed my newborn daughter back to me, stepped out into the hospital hallway, and her voice became alert, invested, and present. She paced the hallway for 20 minutes, completely consumed by Matthew's drama. She was more present for that phone call than she had been for the birth of her granddaughter. She poked her head back into the room, said she had to leave to help Matthew deal with a landlord dispute, and walked out. I lay there in the hospital chair, staring at the ceiling, telling myself not to be dramatic, telling myself at least she came. I lowered the standard and then praised them for clearing it. By the time Caleb was born, I was fully trained by disappointment. But even as I saw how little space my children took up in their hearts, I kept giving. I kept paying my mother's credit card when she fell behind, because she always framed it as temporary. I kept stepping in when my father had a financial gap he swore would be covered soon. And I kept paying for Matthew's shiny new Porsche. He leased a car he absolutely could not afford, claiming he was up for a massive promotion at work and needed to look the part. The promotion never happened. The car payments fell on me. Every arrangement came wrapped in the same language. Just this month, just until payday, just until things calmed down. But things never calmed down. Temporary became recurring. Recurring became normal. And normal became invisible. I also paid into family plans that somehow never fully included me. The group dinners, the weekend trips. I quietly covered the part no one wanted to discuss. Sometimes Emma and I were invited late to these events. Sometimes our kids were treated like an inconvenience. Sometimes I found out details after everyone else, even when my money had already made the whole thing possible. It slipped into my life like background noise. A few hundred here, a card payment there, a covered balance, a deposit, a bill. A little help that became a vicious habit. Emma tried to warn me. She told me that support should not feel one-sided forever. She told me love was not supposed to come with invoices disguised as family loyalty. She warned me that our children were old enough to notice when their father became tense every time his phone lit up with certain names. I thought if I just kept being patient, maybe eventually my parents would stop seeing me as the bank and start seeing me as a son worth protecting. What I did not understand then was that the role I played in that family only worked as long as I kept paying for it. The minute I stopped being useful, I was going to find out exactly how they felt about me. And standing in my kitchen, looking at that group chat, I finally found out. Emma walked over to the kitchen island and wiped her hands on a dish towel. She looked at my face and knew immediately that something had shifted. She didn't ask what was wrong. She just held out her hand. I handed her my phone. I watched her green eyes scan the screen. I watched her read Matthew's cruel message. I watched her register the thumbs-up emojis from my parents. I watched her read my ignored reply and the subsequent conversation about upgrading their vacation cabin. Emma didn't gasp. She didn't tell me to calm down. She didn't tell me to be the bigger person. She set the phone back down on the marble counter. She looked me dead in the eyes, her expression completely hardened. "If they do not want us there," Emma said, her voice completely steady, "they do not get to use you to make tomorrow look perfect." That sentence broke the dam, settled deep into my bones. That was the first moment all night I felt something close to absolute clarity. I did not say a word. I turned around, walked into my home office, and grabbed my laptop. I carried it out to the dining room table, flipped it open, and sat down. Emma stood quietly behind my chair, her hand resting firmly on my shoulder. I opened my email. Sitting right at the top of my inbox was the confirmation from the Oak Creek Country Club. The private room my mother had demanded. The room I booked 3 weeks ago. I stared at the reservation details. The customized lunch menu, the upgraded dessert package, the floral centerpieces I paid extra for because Matthew said the standard ones looked cheap. I felt completely detached, like I was looking at evidence from somebody else's life. I clicked the link to manage my reservation. I navigated to the cancellation page. The screen prompted me with a warning about losing the deposit. I didn't care. I clicked Cancel Event. The screen refreshed. The event was gone. Next, I opened the portal for the catering balance. My mother had called me 2 days earlier, sounding stressed, talking in circles about rising prices, and then went quiet just long enough for me to step in. I had transferred the money that same afternoon. I immediately reversed the charge. I removed my credit card information entirely. Then I found the bakery's website. I pulled up the order for the custom, 3-tiered lemon raspberry cake. I had chosen it based on the exact kind my dad used to ask for when I was a little kid. I hit cancel. Then the DJ. I emailed the DJ my brother insisted they needed, even though it was a lunchtime party and not a wedding reception, and canceled his services. My breathing steadied. I thought my hands would be shaking. I thought I would be second-guessing every move. But I wasn't. I felt precise. I felt focused. I had finally stopped reacting emotionally and started acting truthfully. I logged into my main banking dashboard. This was where the real surgery began. I opened the payment portal for my mother's primary credit card account. I removed my checking account information from the autopay settings. I had been covering her overflow for months. Not because she was helpless, but because every time the balance got too high, somehow I became the solution she never had to thank. Deleted. I opened the account tied to Matthew's monthly Porsche payment. That arrangement had started almost a year ago after one of his rough patches. He swore he only needed help for 2 months until he got back on his feet. I severed the bank connection. He was on his own. Then, I saw the recurring transfer labeled Family Travel Fund. This was the ridiculous little account my mother liked to call our vacation pot. This was the money they were using to plan the cabin trip they were currently discussing in the group chat without me. I clicked into the account history. I scrolled through the deposits for the last 24 months. A sickening realization washed over me. Every single dollar in that account had come from my bank account. Matthew hadn't contributed. My parents hadn't put in a dime. I was entirely funding a vacation that I wasn't invited to. The amount was not the point anymore. It was what each payment represented. Access, assumption, permission. Years of my life turned into a system where everyone else got comfort, and I got pure obligation. I initiated a total withdrawal. I transferred every single cent from the family travel fund directly into the college fund I had set up for Caleb and Chloe. I watched the balance hit 0. It was done. I closed the laptop. I leaned back in my chair. Emma leaned down and kissed the top of my head. We didn't need to speak. I had just dismantled a 36-year-old machine in less than 20 minutes. I picked up my phone. The group chat was still active. They were still talking as if I had simply dropped a dramatic little comment and would eventually come crawling back. Matthew was discussing his outfit. My mother was worried about the weather. My father made another joke. I watched those messages appear one after another and felt something colder than anger move through me. They truly believed I would absorb the insult, show up smiling, pay the bill, and keep the illusion intact. They were relying on a pattern. But the pattern was broken. I set the phone face up on the table, poured myself a glass of water, and waited for the automated emails to reach them. I sat at the dining room table, the glowing screen of my phone the only light in the room. The house was completely quiet now. Emma was upstairs putting the kids to bed. I watched the clock on my phone screen change to 9:08 p.m. Right on schedule, the first confirmation email from the country club hit my inbox. Because my mother was listed as the secondary contact on the event profile, I knew she received the exact same automated email. The card on file had been removed, and the room would not be held without a valid payment method. 2 minutes later, At 9:10 p.m., the bakery sent its cancellation notice. Then the catering service. Then the DJ. I did not send screenshots to the group chat. I did not make an announcement. I did not need to. The system was doing the talking for me. At exactly 9:11 p.m., the casual banter in the family group chat died. It was replaced by absolute chaos. The chat changed completely. Matthew was the first one to break. His message popped up, entirely devoid of his usual arrogance. "What the hell did you do? Fix it." I didn't blink. I didn't type. At 9:13 p.m., my mother's name appeared. Her tone shifted instantly. Suddenly, she was sweet. She was using that exact tone she only adopted when panic replaced her superiority. "Sweetheart, do not do this. This is not funny." A few minutes later, my father followed. He was confused at first, and then sharp when he realized this was not some bluff designed to make a point. What happened to the reservation? Why am I getting these emails? I sat there and read every single message without answering. For years, they had treated my financial help like background noise. It was just something that existed around them like air conditioning in the summer. Now that it was gone, they were finally hearing the deafening silence it left behind. And for the first time in my life, I let them. My phone started vibrating wildly. Incoming call from Mom. Ignored. Incoming call from Matthew. Ignored. Incoming call from Dad. Ignored. I opened the spreadsheet program on my laptop. I pulled up my banking history spanning the last 5 years. If I was going to burn this bridge, I needed to know exactly how much the toll had cost me. I started entering the numbers. The credit card payments for my mother. The rent bailouts and Porsche payments for Matthew. The club dues and emergency house repairs for my parents. The holiday dinners, the trip contributions, the deposits, and all the little quiet rescues that were never really little. I worked meticulously for an hour. Every time my phone vibrated with a new frantic text, I added another row to the spreadsheet. When I finally highlighted the entire column and clicked the AutoSum button, I stared at the final number for a long moment. It wasn't one grand, dramatic check that would have shocked me into waking up. It was dozens of smaller payments that slipped into my life like a virus. The total was $49,450, nearly 50 grand. I took a clear picture of the spreadsheet total on my screen. I didn't send it yet. I wanted the anxiety to marinate. I closed the laptop, walked upstairs, and finally went to sleep. The next morning, the day of my father's 65th birthday, I woke up feeling incredibly light. I got out of bed around 9:30 a.m., made coffee, and sat at the kitchen island while Emma packed lunches for Caleb and Chloe. Emma didn't push me to talk. She just moved around the kitchen with that steady calm I had leaned on so many times before. She set a fresh mug in front of me and looked me in the eye. "You do not owe people comfort after they disrespected you," she said softly. That sentence settled deep. For years, comfort was exactly what I had been providing. Financial comfort, emotional comfort, the comfort of knowing someone else would absorb the mess. At 10:15 a.m., my phone buzzed. My father finally texted me directly, refusing to use the group chat as an audience. "I need to know what is going on. The venue says the reservation is gone. Your mother is upset. Your brother says you are overreacting. Call me." I stared at the message for a long time. My chest physically ached. Not from regret, but from the brutal realization of who he was. Even now, after seeing the fallout, his first concern was the event. He wasn't asking what happened to me. He wasn't asking why the son he raised felt pushed to the brink. He was asking what happened to the party. He wanted the son who had just been told to stay home to fix the logistics. I set the phone down without answering. A little before 11 a.m., I got a voicemail from Cameron, the manager at the country club. He politely confirmed that since no replacement payment had been submitted, the luncheon had been fully canceled and the room released to another party. Hearing that voicemail made the whole thing real in a way the texts had not. My father's perfect birthday lunch, the polished little performance my mother wanted, the social event my brother was dressing up for, it was over. And it wasn't over because I ruined anything. It was over because they built it on top of my loyalty while treating my existence like a burden. By noon, the reality of the situation hit them at the country club. From what I gathered from frantic texts from my aunt later, my family had shown up anyway, assuming I was bluffing. Matthew, trying to play the hero, marched up to the front desk and slapped his credit card down to pay for a new room. His card declined. He tried it again. Declined. It was tied to the account I had severed. In front of the club manager, my parents, and a lobby full of people, Matthew realized his Porsche payment had bounced that morning. His accounts were empty, and his facade was entirely funded by the brother he had just banished. At 12:30 p.m., my phone exploded again. The humiliation had shifted to pure rage. Matthew left a voicemail, his voice tight and shaking with anger. He called me selfish. He said I was punishing everyone over one text. He said Dad was embarrassed, Mom was crying, and I needed to stop making everything about me. I listened to the whole thing without moving. Then I deleted it. I realized the real reason they were spiraling. It was never about repairing the hurt. It was about restoring the machine. They wanted function. They wanted me back in my role quickly enough to save the day and quietly disappear into it again. I was done having private conversations about public humiliation. If my family could insult me in the group chat, then the truth could stay there too. I opened the group chat. I attached the photo of the spreadsheet showing the $49,450 total. Under it, I wrote, "This is what I have spent covering this family over the last 5 years. You never had to ask. You just assumed I would pay." My mother answered immediately. "Family helps family." Matthew chimed in, typing furiously. "You're manipulative. You're trying to make everyone look bad over nothing." My father demanded I call him privately. I refused. I typed back, "It happened in the group when I was told not to come, so it can stay in the group now." Matthew snapped again, saying none of this would be happening if I had just let one rude text go. That was the opening I needed. I dropped the screenshot of his original message. "Stay home. We're sick of your family." And the screenshots of my parents' thumbs-up reactions right beneath the receipts. I typed my final message. One rude text does not erase a family. It exposes one. I am cutting you off over 13 years of being used. I am done paying to be disrespected. Do not contact me again unless it is to apologize to my wife and my children. This is a moment that changed everything, when I finally regained control of my life. Thank you for your patience in getting this far. You are amazing. Please help me like the video and leave a comment with the number 1 below so I know you've been with me this far. This will not only help more people find this story, but also let me know that my experiences are meaningful to someone. Your support is the biggest motivation for me to continue sharing the rest of this journey. I didn't wait to see the typing bubbles appear. I tapped Matthew's contact profile and hit block. I tapped my mother's profile and hit block. I tapped my father's profile and hit block. The silence that followed felt incredibly strange for about 2 seconds. My heart was pounding against my ribs, and my hands were slightly damp. But then, as I stood there in my kitchen looking out the window at the sunlight, it felt like pure, unadulterated peace. The heavy backpack I had been carrying for over a decade just vanished. The messages did not stop right away, of course. A toxic system doesn't just quietly accept the resignation of its primary workhorse. For the next 3 days, they came in waves through email from unknown numbers and through relatives who suddenly felt called to play peacemaker. Aunt Sarah sent me a careful text asking if everything was okay, mentioning she heard the location changed at the last minute. Another cousin messaged me to say my mother sounded completely confused and devastated. That was when I realized the humiliation Matthew kept accusing me of causing was not about my dad's birthday. It was about exposure. For the first time, the truth was leaking out of the private system they had built around me. There was a visible crack between the wealthy, successful image they projected and the reality of how they treated the person funding it. Then, Aunt Sarah inadvertently dropped the final bomb. During a brief phone call, she tried to smooth things over. "Joshua, you know they didn't mean it," she sighed. "And it's such a shame. Your dad was planning a big toast at the lunch. He was going to announce that he was helping Matthew secure the lease for his new business. I stopped dead. Helping him how? Well, he was going to co-sign the commercial lease and announce a small inheritance advance to get him started. They wanted it to be a big family celebration. I almost laughed out loud. The sheer audacity was staggering. They were going to use a private room that I paid for, at a luncheon that I organized, to publicly hand over money and support to the brother who had just banned me from attending. They were going to use my money as the stage for his triumph. Later that evening, David, a cousin who always fancied himself the family patriarch, called me. "Listen, man," David said, his voice dripping with condescending authority. "You made your point, but holding a grudge over a text message? You're tearing the family apart over money. You need to be the bigger man." I recognized the tactic instantly. The guilt trip, the manipulation. David didn't care about my feelings. He just knew that if I stopped bailing Matthew out, the family would eventually look to him for help. "David," I said calmly, "if you are so passionate about keeping the family intact, I will gladly forward you the loan details for Matthew's Porsche. You can take over the payments starting tomorrow. Let me know where to send the paperwork." Dead silence on the other end of the line. I hung up and blocked his number. Finally, an email came through from Matthew. He used an old account I had forgotten he knew. "I'm sorry if my words came out wrong," he wrote. "Dad is crushed. You need to call him. If my words came out wrong." That tiny word told me everything. He was not sorry for what he did. He was sorry it had cost him his car, his status, and his safety net. An apology without accountability is just another way to ask for access. So I did something my family had never trained me to do. I left it alone. I did not explain. I did not defend myself. I shut my laptop, walked into the living room, and sat down on the floor with Emma, Caleb, and Chloe to finish building their blanket fort. It has been roughly 6 months since the day of my father's ruined 65th birthday party. 6 months since I pressed a few buttons on my laptop, severed the financial umbilical cord, and watched the grand illusion of my family completely disintegrate. People often ask me what the immediate aftermath of cutting off your entire family feels like. You might expect it to be a period filled with dramatic shouting matches, tearful confrontations on your front porch, or some cinematic climax where everyone sits down in a therapist's office and learns a valuable lesson about love and respect. But the reality is much quieter, much more isolating at first, and honestly much more terrifying for the people who are used to using you. The first real shift I noticed was physical. For the first 2 weeks, my body was still running on the adrenaline of a 36-year-old defense mechanism. Every time my phone buzzed with an email from work or a calendar reminder, my shoulders would instantly tense. My jaw would clench. I would expect to see a venomous text from Matthew demanding money, or a passive-aggressive guilt trip from my mother about how I was tearing the family apart. Emma would catch me staring blankly at the wall in the kitchen, my coffee getting completely cold in my hands. She didn't push me. She just walked over, wrapped her arms around my waist, and rested her head against my back. That simple, quiet support was the anchor that kept me from drifting back into the fog of guilt. Then, the first of the month arrived. This was always the most stressful day on my calendar. The day my corporate salary hit my checking account. Usually, I would spend my entire lunch break sitting in my office, partitioning that money out like a man desperately trying to plug holes in a sinking ship. A massive chunk for my mother's credit card minimums, which always seemed to edge closer to the maximum limit. Another massive slice for Matthew's ridiculous Porsche lease, because he absolutely needed a luxury vehicle to maintain the illusion of his impending promotion. Another slice for the Phantom Family Travel Fund. But this time I opened my banking app and the money just sat there. It was entirely mine. I didn't owe anyone a single dime. The sheer volume of the balance staring back at me was staggering. I had been hemorrhaging money for so long that I forgot what it felt like to actually keep the fruits of my own labor. I took a deep breath, selected a large percentage of that salary, and transferred it directly into Caleb and Chloe's college fund. I sat back in my desk chair and watched the green confirmation checkmark appear on the screen. For years, I had been shortchanging my own children's future to fund the lifestyle of a 32-year-old golden child who had the audacity to tell me to stay away from my own father. Watching that college fund grow by thousands of dollars in a single afternoon was the most intoxicating, validating feeling in the world. I was finally investing in the people who actually loved me. My parents tried to punish me with the silent treatment for the first few weeks. It is a classic manipulation tactic in toxic households. They assume that if they withdraw their presence, you will panic, feel the agonizing void of their disapproval, and come crawling back, begging for their attention with your wallet wide open. What they completely failed to realize was that their silence was not a punishment to me. It was a vacation. It was the deepest, most restful peace I had experienced in my entire adult life. When the silent treatment failed to produce a frantic apology and a wire transfer from me, the tactics changed. They realized the machine was actually broken, and true panic set in. Without my monthly bailouts, their financial house of cards collapsed entirely, and it collapsed fast. Matthew was the first to fall under the crushing weight of his own consequences. The promotion he had been bragging about to our extended family? It was a complete fabrication. He didn't even have a full-time job. He was doing freelance consulting that brought in pennies. Without my bank account quietly covering the auto drafts, the Porsche was repossessed in the middle of the night. I found that out through the grapevine, when a mutual friend texted me asking why Matthew was suddenly asking for rides to the grocery store. 2 weeks later, he was facing eviction from his luxury apartment because he had been lying to the landlord for months. The desperation began to bleed into my daily life. Since my phone number was blocked, they started using flying monkeys. Relatives who thought they were helping but were really just acting as messengers for my parents' manipulation. One afternoon, I ran into my older cousin, David, at the hardware store. David had always fancied himself the patriarch of our generation, the guy who kept the family together through sheer force of will. He cornered me in the plumbing aisle. He didn't ask how I was doing. He didn't ask how Emma and the kids were. He crossed his arms and looked at me like I was a rebellious teenager. "You need to drop this grudge, Joshua," David said, his voice loud enough to echo down the aisle. "Your parents are a mess. Your dad is talking about tapping into his retirement savings to help Matthew avoid a lawsuit over his broken commercial lease. They are talking about putting a second mortgage on the house. Do you really want to be the reason your parents lose their home? You make a great salary. You can fix this. Be the bigger man." I looked at David. I saw the same entitlement in his eyes that I saw in my mother's. "David," I said, keeping my voice incredibly calm and low, "my parents are choosing to risk their home to protect a 32-year-old man from the consequences of his own actions. That is their choice. If you are so concerned about their financial ruin, I suggest you write them a check. But do not ever approach me in public again to demand my money for people who told me my family makes them sick." I walked away, leaving him standing there with his mouth open. I walked to my car, got in, and gripped the steering wheel. I didn't feel guilty. I felt powerful. I was no longer the designated victim, but the final, defining moment of this entire ordeal, the moment that permanently killed any lingering ghost of hope I had for reconciliation, happened a few days later. I was sitting in my home office going over some spreadsheets when an email notification popped up on my screen. It was an unrecognized address, but the subject line simply read, "Apology from Matthew." Against my better judgment, I opened it. The email was long, surprisingly articulate, and hit all the right emotional notes. Matthew wrote about how the stress of his failing business and his crumbling personal life had made him lash out like a wounded animal. He wrote about how much he valued our brotherhood and how the last 2 months of silence had shown him how much he relied on my wisdom. He said he realized he had been taking me for granted and wanted to sit down, face to face, just the two of us, to make things right. He even threw in a line about how much he missed his niece and nephew, saying he wanted to be the fun uncle again. For a brief, fleeting second, the old version of me, the boy who just wanted a brother who cared about him, felt a tiny spark of warmth in my chest. Maybe the shock of losing his car and his apartment had actually woken him up. Maybe hitting rock bottom was exactly what he needed to finally grow up. Then I scrolled down. Matthew is many things, but he is not detail-oriented. In his rush to send the email and win me back, he had forwarded a message from his phone to a new email client, and he forgot to delete the email history at the very bottom of the thread. He had left the original text buried beneath his signature line. I narrowed my eyes and read the hidden text. It was an email from my mother to Matthew, sent just 3 hours prior. The words on the screen burned themselves into my memory. Matthew, just copy and paste this text and send it to your brother from a new address so it bypasses his block. Do not change a single word. Sound humble and mention the kids. He always goes soft for the kids. Your father is speaking to a corporate lawyer tomorrow about the massive penalties on that commercial lease you abandoned. We are completely out of liquid cash, and your father is threatening a divorce if we lose the house over this. We need Joshua to calm down, drop his ridiculous boundaries, and open his checkbook again, or they are going to sue you into oblivion. Send this apology right now and play nice until we get his credit card back on file. We can deal with his arrogant wife later. I read that paragraph 3 times. The air in my office felt suddenly ice cold. My vision actually blurred for a second. There was no sudden realization of brotherhood. There was no remorse for telling me my family made them sick. There was no love. It was a script. A calculated, cold-blooded, venomous script written by my own mother to manipulate me into paying for Matthew's lawyer fees and bailing him out of yet another disaster. They were literally treating me like a mark in a long con. My mother was willing to use the names of my children as bait to get to my bank account. She was willing to insult Emma behind my back while plotting to steal our family's security. I did not feel angry. Anger implies passion, and passion implies you still care. I felt a profound, overwhelming sense of absolute emptiness regarding them. It was the kind of final, undeniable grief you feel at a funeral when the casket finally closes. In that moment, I was mourning the death of the parents I deserved, and permanently accepting the terrifying reality of the parents I actually had. I didn't write a long, emotional response. I didn't yell at the screen. I hit reply, deleted Matthew's fake, rehearsed apology, and left only my mother's instructions in the body of the email. I added one single sentence at the top. I read the bottom. Do not ever contact me again, or my lawyer will be sending a cease and desist. I hit send. I permanently blocked that email address. I set up a strict filter on my server to send any future emails from any of them directly to a hidden trash folder. The door was not just closed. It was locked, deadbolt, and buried under a mountain of concrete. That weekend, Emma and I made a deliberate, conscious choice to reclaim our peace and redefine what our weekends looked like. We woke up early on a Saturday morning. The autumn air was crisp, biting at the windows, and the leaves were turning brilliant shades of orange and gold in our backyard. Normally, a Saturday morning in the fall meant I was waking up with a knot of anxiety in my stomach. It meant I was driving across town to help my dad clean his gutters because he refused to hire someone, or getting dragged to some overpriced, pretentious brunch to pay the bill for my mother and her country club friends. Instead, I walked downstairs in my worn-out sweatpants. Emma was already in the kitchen, a smudge of white flour on her cheek, pouring pancake batter onto the hot cast-iron griddle. The rich, sweet smell of vanilla extract and melting butter filled the entire house, pushing out any lingering shadows from the week. Caleb and Chloe were running around the living room in their pajamas, dragging every heavy blanket and couch cushion they could find to build a massive, structurally questionable fort behind the sofa. I walked up behind Emma, wrapped my arms tightly around her waist, and rested my chin on her shoulder. She leaned back into my chest, flipping a perfect, golden brown pancake. "Good morning," she smiled, turning her head to press a soft kiss to my cheek. "It really is," I said, and I meant it with every single fiber of my being. We spent the morning eating way too many pancakes drenched in thick maple syrup. I crawled into the blanket fort with my kids, squishing my 6-foot frame onto a pile of decorative pillows, and we spent an hour making up ridiculous, elaborate stories about dragons guarding hidden treasures. I listened to my daughter's high-pitched, breathless giggles and my son's dramatic gasps as the imaginary dragon swooped down. Nobody was asking me for a high-interest loan. Nobody was checking their expensive watch to see if they could leave for a better party. Nobody was treating my presence like a toll booth they had to pass through to get to the vault. I was just Dad. I was just Joshua. And to these three beautiful people, that was entirely enough. Later that afternoon, even though it was a little early in the season, Emma suggested we go pick out a Christmas tree. We bundled up in thick wool sweaters, scarves, and boots, and drove out to a sprawling local farm just outside the city limits. We spent 2 hours walking through the endless, fragrant rows of pine and spruce trees. The cold air stung our cheeks, but we didn't care. Caleb was passionately, stubbornly arguing that we needed the absolute tallest tree on the entire lot, pointing to a massive, imposing 10-foot spruce that would require cutting a hole in our living room ceiling. Chloe, on the other hand, found a tiny, completely lopsided, pathetic-looking Charlie Brown tree in the corner and declared, with absolute certainty, that it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen in her entire life. I stood back and watched my wife expertly negotiate a compromise between the two of them, her breath pluming in the freezing air, her eyes bright, crinkling at the corners with pure happiness. We finally settled on a thick, perfectly shaped Douglas fir. I pulled my wallet out to pay the old farmer for the tree. I handed him the cash. It was a simple, everyday transaction, $100 for a tree. But as the farmer thanked me, tipped his hat, and handed me my paper receipt, I realized something profound. I loved spending this money. I loved providing for the people standing in front of me. Because this exchange, this life I was funding, was built on a rock-solid foundation of mutual respect, loyalty, and genuine affection. I wasn't buying their tolerance. I wasn't paying a ransom to avoid their disappointment. I was funding our shared joy. I was building memories, not paying off debts of guilt. We strapped the heavy tree to the roof of our SUV and drove home as the sun began to set, casting a warm, golden, peaceful light over our neighborhood. We ordered 2 massive pepperoni pizzas, played classic Christmas music way too early in the year, and spent the evening decorating our living room. Somewhere between untangling a ridiculously massive ball of holiday lights and lifting Chloe up on my shoulders so she could proudly place the glowing star on the very top of the tree, the final, stubborn, lingering knot of guilt in my stomach completely dissolved. It vanished into the ether. I had spent 36 years believing I was fundamentally broken, fundamentally unlovable unless I was making myself useful to the people who shared my DNA. I thought I had to earn my breath. But looking around my warm, chaotic, beautiful living room, watching the fire crackle in the hearth and seeing my real family smile at me, I knew the absolute truth. I was always worthy of love. I was always enough. I had just spent my entire life trying to buy it from the wrong store, from people whose shelves were completely empty. It has been a long, painful, but ultimately beautiful journey from that Friday night in my kitchen, staring at a cruel text message on my phone, to where I am today. Looking back at the wreckage with the clarity of distance, I can honestly say, without a single ounce of sarcasm, that Matthew sending that vile message to the group chat was the absolute greatest gift he could have ever given me. He thought he was putting me in my place. He thought he was exerting power, reminding me that I was a permanent outsider in their exclusive, delusional club. What he actually did was hand me the heavy iron key to my own cage. He gave me the undeniable proof I needed to finally stop gaslighting myself. For anyone listening to this who resonates with my story, anyone who feels the heavy, suffocating weight of being the designated savior in a toxic family system, I need you to hear this loud and clear. You cannot love someone into respecting you. You cannot buy their genuine affection. If a person fundamentally views you as a utility, a walking ATM, a free therapist, a crisis manager, no amount of generosity, no amount of saintly patience, and no amount of crippling financial sacrifice will suddenly make them wake up and see your humanity. They will simply consume whatever you put in front of them, wipe their mouths, and complain that the portions were too small. My parents and my brother did not love me. They loved my function. They loved the absolute ease and luxury I brought to their chaotic lives. The minute I removed the function, I ceased to have any value to them as a human being. That is a brutal, terrifying reality to accept when it comes to the people who raised you. It goes against everything society, television, and culture tell us about blood and loyalty. We are deeply conditioned from birth to believe that family is family, and that you have to endure any amount of disrespect, abuse, or exploitation simply because you share a last name or a genetic code. We are taught to forgive the unforgivable just to keep the peace at the Thanksgiving table. But I am here to tell you that family without boundaries is not safety. It is captivity. Love without respect is not love. It is pure, unadulterated manipulation. And staying in a room where you are actively despised just because you have always been there is a disservice to your own soul. I had to grieve the family I thought I was building. I had to let go of the pathetic, lingering fantasy that one day, if I just paid the right bill, bought the right luxury gift, or solved the right crisis, my father would look at me with the same fierce pride he looked at Matthew. I had to accept the cold fact that my mother would always choose the manufactured chaos of my brother over the quiet stability of my children. I had to accept that there might be a day where I don't attend a family funeral, or where I am entirely cut out of an inheritance that was largely built on my own stolen wealth. But in letting go of that toxic fantasy, I gained my actual beautiful reality. I gained a marriage that is stronger and more passionate than ever, because my wife no longer has to sit on the sidelines and watch the man she loves be torn apart and belittled by people who don't care about him. I gained a deeper, more profound connection with my children, because my mental energy is no longer drained by the endless, manufactured drama of my brother's disastrous life. I gained immense financial security, knowing that the wealth I work so hard to build every single day will go toward my children's college fund, their future homes, and my family's peace of mind, not a luxury car for a man who openly despises my existence. I am no longer the fixer. I am no longer the bank. I am no longer the emotional punching bag. I am just a husband and a father, and for the first time in my entire life, I am completely, unapologetically at peace with that. If there is one vital educational lesson I want to impart to you from this entire ordeal, it is about recognizing the psychological trap of the useful child dynamic. In many deeply dysfunctional families, roles are assigned early and rigidly. One child is assigned the role of the golden child, the one who receives unconditional praise, endless financial backing, and absolutely zero accountability for their failures. Another child is assigned the role of the scapegoat or the workhorse, the one who receives zero praise but is forced to carry all the accountability, all the guilt, and all the burdens. If you are the workhorse, you will naturally fall into the trap of trying to perform your way into their hearts. You will achieve more in your career, you will pay more of their bills, and you will sacrifice your own boundaries, falsely believing that sheer competence and generosity will eventually earn you their love. It won't. I promise you, it never will. It will only earn you more work. It will only increase their entitlement. You have to recognize that their inability to value you is not a reflection of your worth. It is a glaring reflection of their own brokenness and limitations. You are entirely allowed to stop paying the invoice for a relationship you aren't even actively participating in. You are allowed to walk away from a table where respect is no longer being served. Setting a firm boundary feels like a violent betrayal only to those who were actively benefiting from your lack of them. Stand firm. Hold your ground. Your mental peace, your financial future, and the well-being of the family you created are worth infinitely more than the conditional approval of the family you came from. Thank you for staying with me through this entire journey. It wasn't an easy story to tell, and revisiting those memories brought up a lot of old ghosts. But it is one I deeply know someone out there needed to hear today. Now, I want to turn this over to you. I want to hear your voices. What is the biggest lesson or perspective you are taking away from my experience? Have you ever had to set a hard financial or emotional boundary with your own toxic family members? And how did making that terrifying choice change your life? Please share your thoughts and your stories in the comments below. We learn from each other's strength. Or, if you simply resonated with the message and the educational takeaway of this story, if you understand the power of walking away from people who only value your utility, just comment the word good below so I know this reached you. Your support, your empathy, and your stories mean the absolute world to me. Stay strong, aggressively protect your peace, and I will see you in the next one.